Have you ever met someone you were certain was the one? Someone who arrived quietly, who listened more than they spoke, and who made you feel chosen, especially when you thought that part of your life was already behind you? Most people don't stop to wonder what it costs to be loved that convincingly, because by the time you think to ask who they really are, they've already learned everything about you, your habits, your vulnerabilities, your finances. The women in this case believed they had found companionship. By the time anyone realized what was happening, 6 lives had vanished without a single body ever being found. This wasn't just an ordinary predator. He established a system, one built on trust, maintained through therapy sessions, and powered by the idea that love, late in life, was something to be grateful for. Until one woman didn't disappear the way she was supposed to, and the entire operation began to unravel. I'm Detective Cassandra Maddox, and today I uncover the troubled secret life of Jeffrey Morgan. Jeffrey Morgan was a sales associate by day, the kind of man who knew how to listen, who said exactly what people needed to hear. However, the dark side of him inserted himself into the lives of older, wealthy, widowed women who were lonely enough to be trusting. By the time those women believed they were in love, Jeffrey Morgan had already positioned himself to take everything they had. The first woman was 72, recently widowed, and extremely wealthy. She was a quiet and private woman, which is why no one questioned it when she said she'd met someone. He cooked for her, drove her to appointments, learned the names of her grandchildren, and slowly became necessary. There were no sudden withdrawals of money, no frantic transfers, just small adjustments, a joint account for convenience, a financial advisor he recommended, bills he offered to handle so she wouldn't have to worry. The last time anyone saw her, she told a neighbor she was happy. 2 weeks later, she stopped answering her phone. Her house was locked, her car was in the garage. Nothing appeared stolen, except her money. And even then, only if you knew where to look, she became the blueprint that investigators used to crack open this case. And once we knew what to look for, the pattern became unmistakable. Jeffrey Morgan volunteered where older, wealthy women were already present. Charity boards, museum memberships, estate planning seminars, support groups for widows. He never approached them romantically. Instead, he positioned himself as useful. He offered rides, help with technology, someone to listen without interruption. Only after weeks, sometimes months, did he introduce the idea of possibility, about how companionship later in life was different, quieter, more intentional. By the time physical intimacy occurred, the women believed it had been their idea. That's when the financial access began. He recycled the same reasons: a joint account for emergencies, a financial advisor he claimed to have used for years, power of attorney framed as protection. When the money moved, it flowed into legitimate-looking entities, LLCs, trusts, consulting accounts, designed to survive scrutiny. And how he spoke to them, it wasn't charm. Someone had taught him how to sound trustworthy, how to pace affection, how to mirror vulnerability without revealing any of his own. The language we kept seeing about patience, boundaries, and earned trust didn't come from trial and error. It came from therapy. His therapist coached him on emotional mirroring, on how to frame dependence as mutual support, on how to pace intimacy without triggering suspicion. Jeffrey first came into contact with his therapist, Angela Basque, because he was battling addiction, relapses, financial instability, a growing sense that his life was slipping out of control. At first, the sessions were ordinary. Discussions about impulse control, about emptiness, about the need to feel wanted. She noticed how easily he attached, how validation steadied him, how attention calmed the cravings. She told him connection could be a substitute. That structure could quiet addiction. Then she introduced the idea carefully, not as a crime or exploitation, but as a distraction. She said the money they would get from it would remove stressors, and that stability would reduce relapse risk. And if the relationships ended quietly, no one would be harmed. They would split what he received. She would manage the money, and he would follow the process. Jeffrey believed he was being treated, so he went along with everything Angela told him to do. Over the next 4 years, 6 women entered his life under different names, different circumstances, but the same script. Each relationship followed the same arc: introduction, dependency, access. Each woman transferred assets gradually, believing she was securing a future for them. And each time, when the money had been fully redirected, he'd end their lives. A spiked drink, an overdose on prescribed medications, suffocation, whatever it took to get the job done. By the 6th disappearance, the pattern was perfected, and neither of them believed it would ever stop working. Until the 7th woman. She was wealthy, widowed, and lived alone. But that was where the similarities ended. She wasn't looking for companionship. She hadn't joined support groups. She didn't linger after events. Jeffrey met her by accident, or what looked like one. They got stuck in an elevator together at a library she frequented and started talking. A shared complaint about the building's management. A conversation that wasn't supposed to go anywhere. Angela flagged her immediately because she was independent, detail-oriented, and less emotionally porous than the others. Not ideal. Jeffrey was told to disengage, but he didn't. Instead of accelerating intimacy, he slowed it. Instead of rehearsed language, he spoke plainly. For the first time, he stopped performing. And something Angela hadn't planned for happened. She was losing control over Jeffrey. That was the moment the system began to fail. Jeffrey started missing therapy sessions. He delayed a report. He used language that wasn't in the script. He said the woman made him feel steady, that the cravings had eased, that for the first time he didn't feel like he was pretending, that he loved her. Angela didn't validate him. She warned him. She told him attachment was relapse in disguise, that emotions were the fastest way back to chaos. Of course, Jeffrey pushed back. He said this wasn't like the others, that he wouldn't ask for anything or take money from her. When she asked for her bank account information, he refused. So she gave him a choice: return to the process or be removed from it permanently. Angela started to panic, and for the first time since the arrangement began, she found a replacement. She had another patient trained the same way she did Jeffrey, just without the hesitation. At the same time, the 7th woman began to feel the shift. Jeffrey grew distant and more guarded. She noticed his phone ring once every hour they were together. A car she didn't recognize idling too long outside her house. She did what the others never had. She paid attention. So when a stranger introduced himself days later, claiming to be a friend of Jeffrey's, concerned about his sudden silence, she didn't let him inside. She closed the door and called Jeffrey immediately. He didn't answer. That night, she changed her routine. And somewhere else, Angela watched a process she had perfected begin to destabilize, because the substitute followed the script, but the woman no longer did. Rachel Donovan is her name, the 7th woman. But this woman, she didn't disappear. She survived to tell her tale. When we spoke, she didn't rush to explain herself. So, how did you and Jeffrey meet?
We didn't meet in some big dramatic way. It was honestly boring. We kept running into each other at the library I volunteer at. We got stuck together in the elevator one time and got to talking, complaining about the elevator, the weather, nothing memorable. Most men his age barely paid me a second glance. He didn't. He was attentive. He remembered things. The kind you don't expect someone to. He showed up when he said he would. He listened without interrupting. And he didn't treat me like something that needed fixing. He was easy to be around. That was the dangerous part. Money didn't come up. The future didn't come up. He never rushed or pushed me to do anything. He let it feel normal. That's why it worked.
When did you start to notice changes in him?
It wasn't like he changed overnight. That's the part people get wrong. He started asking questions he hadn't asked before. Questions about my schedule, who checked on me regularly. At first, it sounded like concern, but turned out he was feeding that information to his therapist. He began saying I did or said certain things that I know I didn't, really making me question my sanity. It felt like he was working from notes. There were moments when he seemed to anticipate my reactions too perfectly. I'd start to say something, and he'd already know what it'd be. The reassurance, the tone, like he'd rehearsed it. I didn't want to be paranoid, and I didn't want to ruin something that felt good. But eventually I stopped sharing certain things. I changed my routines. I withheld details. I wasn't so forthcoming with information anymore to see how he'd react.
And how did he react?
I think he noticed the distance, so he tried to appeal to me emotionally. He told me he'd never been in love before, and that what he felt for me, he never felt with anyone else. But a week later, I found a handwritten note in his jacket pocket while hanging it up. It thanked him for his patience, for his understanding, for making the loneliness feel manageable again, that she loved him. It was signed with a woman's name I didn't recognize. A few weeks later, I found out he was in therapy. We'd been together 7 months at this point. I wasn't snooping or looking for proof of anything. Jeffrey had left his phone on the kitchen counter while he showered. It buzzed once, then again. I wasn't even going to look, but it kept lighting up. A message preview flashed across the screen from a woman named Angela. It said, "Keep reinforcing the widow narrative. She's responding exactly how we predicted." I remember thinking, widow? So I opened the thread. There were pages of old messages, my insecurities written out in bullet points, my routines, my fears, things I'd only ever said to him. Angela's responses were about making sure he made me depend on him and not to rush the proposal until I came to trust him completely.
What did you do then?
I didn't confront him yet. I needed to see how far this would go. So I did exactly what they wanted. I just didn't tell him I was suspicious of him. I became the easiest woman in the world to love. I asked about forever, started talking about selling my house. I told him I'd never felt this safe with anyone.
Did he fall for it?
Jeffrey began pushing the relationship forward faster. He planned weekend trips, asked for a joint account. He asked casual questions about wills and beneficiaries slipped in between kisses. He kept calling me smart, like that was a compliment.
Did you notice any changes in his behavior after that?
The nicer I was, the more nervous he became. He stopped leaving his phone around. He stopped drinking. In a way, he started paying more attention to me, like he was watching my every move. So, when he disappeared for 3 days with no contact, I knew for certain that something was going on.
At At this point in her story, Rachel didn't yet understand how dangerous Jeffrey's silence really was, because while she waited, wondering why he hadn't called, Angela Basque was preparing to end her. During those 3 days, Jeffrey went back to Angela. She recognized that Jeffrey was slipping from her grip, so she told him things she thought would get him back on track. She told him Rachel was destabilizing his progress, that attachment was triggering relapse behaviors, that closure was necessary. She told him that she, Angela, was his true love, that no one could love him how she could. Then she gave him an ultimatum, her or Rachel. Jeffrey then revealed to her that he knew about the other man. He showed her emails which were not at all therapy related. They were late-night messages, pet names, photographs that had nothing to do with treatment. She was intimately involved with him. They had a shared bank account and plans to get rid of Jeffrey after they'd done away with Rachel. She attempted to reframe the moment, suggesting confusion, relapse, paranoia. But Jeffrey was done. He intended to walk away, take what was his, and build a life with Rachel. At that moment, Angela determined to end Jeffrey's life instead, so she reached for a letter opener to do just that, aiming for his throat. She sliced his shoulder instead, and Jeffrey was able to escape. That very moment, she made the call to the other man to go ahead with a new plan. Kill both Jeffrey and Rachel. Meanwhile, at Rachel's house, the other man got to her. He was well-dressed, carrying himself with the same practiced ease Jeffrey once had. He said he was a friend, that Jeffrey had sent him. Rachel hesitated, just long enough to notice something was off, but not long enough to close the door just as he forced himself in. He asked her questions he shouldn't have known the answers to, details about her routines, her finances, the nights she stayed home alone. That was when Rachel understood. Jeffrey hadn't disappeared. He'd been replaced. And somewhere across the city, Jeffrey Morgan was bleeding in his car, racing toward a house he feared he might already be too late to save. This is what Rachel had to say about that night.
I remember thinking I couldn't let him feel awkward. I asked him if he wanted water, wine, anything. He told me Jeffrey had asked him to check on me. That's when I knew he was lying. Jeffrey never asked anyone to check on me. He never mentioned friends or family in the time we were together. But I kept talking anyway, about the house, my old job, about nothing that mattered. I kept thinking, if I stay interesting, I stay alive. I noticed he already knew things. What time I usually went to bed, that I didn't like loud noises, where I grew up, how old I was, that I had no siblings. Those were things I never wrote down. I only ever said them. At one point, I excused myself and texted Jeffrey. I didn't know if he'd see it. I didn't even know if he was alive.
Why didn't you call the police instead?
Because I didn't know what to tell them. That a man showed up and made me uncomfortable. I didn't know how much danger I was in, or how quickly one mistake could end everything sooner for me.
Did Jeffrey get your text?
He did. I didn't hear him come in right away. The man stopped talking. That's when I knew someone else was there. When I turned around, there was Jeffrey. His shirt and hands were bloody. His face was pale. Now I was caught in between two men I didn't know. Well, one I thought I did, but wasn't sure about anymore. They just stared at each other, smiling. I remember the man saying to Jeffrey that Angela doesn't like loose ends, and he was going to take care of that tonight. The next thing I remember is Jeffrey shoving me out of the way, and then shouting, glass shattering, and someone dropping to the floor. When I looked up, Jeffrey stood in front of me, shaking, crying. and apologizing, saying he loved me. And this isn't how it was supposed to go, and how he was turned into someone he didn't recognize. He told me he didn't want me to see any of that. Then he told me everything except for the 6 women he killed, that I learned later after he was investigated. After it was over, there was this awful quiet. Jeffrey kept talking, apologizing. He wanted me to look at him, like if I met his eyes, it would mean something. I walked into the kitchen and picked up my phone and called the police.
By the time officers arrived at Rachel Donovan's home, the outcome was already set. The man on the floor was alive, but barely. Jeffrey Morgan didn't resist. He didn't explain. He just sat on the steps outside, blood drying on his shirt, staring at the ground like someone who already knew the ending. Back at the station, Jeffrey talked. Not to save himself, not to protect Angela, but because Rachel had survived, and that broke the system. Financial records exposed a pattern prosecutors couldn't ignore. 2 parallel trails of money. 6 women whose disappearances had been ruled accidents, illnesses, or voluntary vanishing. All of them tied back to Angela and Jeffrey. Angela Bask was arrested 3 days later in her office. She didn't cry, didn't deny it. She asked for a lawyer and corrected the detective on the pronunciation of her credentials. Jeffrey Morgan was charged for his role in 6 murders. The other man, whose name we discovered was Alan Blacksmith, followed soon after. Angela Bask was charged with conspiracy, exploitation, and orchestrating each crime. In the end, none of them won, except Rachel. She didn't get justice for the women who came before her, but she made sure there would be no 8th, and when the final move was made, there was only one word left: checkmate. If you're still here, you're one of the curious ones. Stick around. The next mystery's already waiting.